The Sunday school lesson for July 21st, 2024 is The Deliverance of the Jews. Esther chapter 8, verses 3 through 8, chapter 9, verses 18 through 23. Welcome, viewers and subscribers to my channel, The Backstory and More. I am Audrey. If you are new here and you are interested in knowing what happens before each Sunday school lesson, you are at the right place because I will share the backstory, read the lesson text, and offer a brief lesson summary. The backstory actually begins where last Sunday's lesson ended, with Esther making the profound, compelling statement, "If I perish, I perish." The king was pleased with Esther. He asked, "What is your request?" Undoubtedly, he knew that she would not risk her life for a trifling matter. She was after something important. It is no surprise that the king was willing to get Haman at once to attend this queen's banquet. It is not known exactly why Esther chose to delay her request yet again, but the ensuing events display the importance of this postponement in the grand scheme of things. Haman was filled with rage against Mordecai because he neither rose nor showed fear in Haman's presence. It is ironic since Mordecai's previous offense was that he would not bow to Haman. With 10 sons, vast wealth, and his promotions, Haman had much to brag about. Ancient kings kept records of events that transpired during their reign, the book of the Chronicles. That night, King Xerxes heard about Mordecai's part in uncovering the assassination plot, which can only be attributed to God's sovereignty and providence through the king likely never understood his part in God's plan for his people. Much as Haman had withheld from the king the identity of the people he wanted annihilated, the king also kept quiet about the name of the man he delights to honor. The irony of this quickly becomes apparent. Haman's humiliation was immediate and harsh. Having to honor the man he abhorred by leading him through the city streets led to his great grief. His advisors and his wife were not sympathetic, however. They somehow realized the power of the Jews and presumably their God, and knew that anyone who stood against them would surely come to ruin. When the king again asked Esther for her petition, she still did not mention her people by name. Because the king was not yet clued in to the part he played in this situation, he was focused on his queen, whom he obviously cared for. In her speech, Esther used the exact three Hebrew verbs, destroyed, killed, and annihilated, that were used in the edict against the Jews, chapter 3, verse 13. Haman was terrified because his plot was now seen as a direct attack on the queen. Ironically, Haman pleaded for his life from one of the many he had plotted to kill. It was customary to take meals while reclining on a couch. We do not know the details of why or how Haman was falling on Esther's couch, but it is clear that the king believed Haman was trying to molest the queen. If Haman's fate had not yet been sealed, this was the final straw. In the greatest display of irony in this story, they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, chapter 5, verse 14. Haman's pride truly led to his fall. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18 may have no better example in Scripture than in the story of Haman. The king confiscated the estate of Haman, as was customary concerning the property of traitors, and he gave it to Queen Esther. Esther had told the king of her relation to Mordecai, who then essentially took over Haman's position in the kingdom. All the things Haman had desired or boasted about for himself now belonged to his greatest enemy. Verses 3 through 4. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. Verse 5. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. Verses 6 through 7. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Verse 8. Now, write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. Chapter 9, verses 18 through 19. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rest and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. Verses 20 through 21. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. Verse 22. As the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Verse 23. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. A brief summary. Esther's work was not finished. There was still the matter of Haman's plan devised against the Jews. She approached the king again, but likely with much less hesitation than before. Chapter 4, verse 11. Due to the preceding events, Esther knew the king would extend the royal scepter to her this time. Esther carefully laid out her argument point by point. Her first appeal was personal. If he is pleased with me. Of course, she had clear evidence that she had found favor in the king's sight, but a reminder wouldn't hurt. The phrase, and thinks it the right thing, was Esther's appeal to the king's sense of justice. In requesting that the king overrule the dispatches that Haman devised and wrote, Esther placed the blame for the evil decree on Haman rather than on the king. Finally, Esther reminded the king that these were her people and family, not some nameless, faceless people in a far off land. The challenge here was how to revoke an irrevocable law. The king gave Mordecai the authority to write another decree as he saw fit. The king's trust in Haman had been misplaced, but he seemed certain that Mordecai could be trusted. He had good reason for this conclusion because Mordecai had reported the conspiracy against the king, quite possibly saving the king's life. Chapter 2, verses 19 through 23. Although the first decree could not be rescinded by any man, its effect could be nullified by another decree granting the Jews the right to defend themselves if attacked. Though Mordecai would write this decree, it would circulate under the authority of the king, bearing his seal. Like the first decree, this one could not be revoked. These bloody conflicts occurred mainly on 2 days, the 13th day and 14th day of Adar. This month corresponds to late February or early March. The time that had been set for the destruction of the Jews became, instead, days of salvation for them, a time of feasting and joy. The plan by which the enemies of the Jews hoped to destroy them became an event that bound the Jews more closely together across the Persian Empire. The Jews in different parts of the empire had different experiences in defending themselves. As a result, they did not all observe this special event on the same day. Some wanted to celebrate on the 14th, and some wanted to celebrate on the 15th. Because of his work in saving the Jews from Haman's scheme, Mordecai had become the recognized leader of the Jewish people wherever they lived in the empire. Thus, he was the one who settled the issue. Instead of one day, the Jews would have 2 days to celebrate. This tradition continues to this day, with Purim being observed on the 14th day of Adar, somewhere, everywhere, but in Jerusalem, where it is celebrated on the 15th. The phrase Mordecai recorded these events has led some to believe that Mordecai wrote the book of Esther. A more common interpretation is that he wrote about the events in the letters sent to all the Jews throughout the provinces. The days of feasting and joy were a time of celebration and community for the Jews. All too often in the scriptures, the Jews were divided on many issues. But in the book of Esther, the Jews living in Persia stood as one. This was something to celebrate, on top of their victory over their enemies. This celebratory time also included the biblical theme of giving, gifts to the poor. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join me soon for the next backstory and more. And remember, every Sunday at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, I release a video for the upcoming Sunday school lesson. Thank you so much in advance for all that you do to support this channel. Stay safe and may God bless.